Hi, everybody, and welcome to OCAD University. It's wonderful to host you here. And Peter Copen, thank you very much for bringing your class. That's fantastic. I'm going to use this mic and not echo with this one. And I met some of the participants who were at York University yesterday, and it was great to hear some of the presentations there. So I just wanted to start a little bit by talking about, I think we're just going to move this. Maybe turn this mic off, yeah. I wanted to start a little bit by talking about OCAD University's work with data and why we're interested and involved as an art and design institution in this really important space. So we work with everything from machine learning and data analytics, and you had a great exposure to some of that yesterday, but with a very big focus on data representation. So that is both visualization, it's scientific and information visualization and representation, and it's also non-visual forms of data presentation and analysis. And I'm thrilled that Peter and some of the participants in the CREATE program from his lab will be speaking today, because you'll have a sense of, when we think about data representation, what are we thinking about? So visual analytics is a term that means the combination of data analytics, cognitive science, and the visualization or representation of data to support analytic reasoning. And we also have strength here in information graphics, which is really, I like to think about it as illustrating data in meaningful ways, often with metaphors. And Card, McKinley, and Schneiderman in their very important 1999 text, and I cite something from 1999 just to remind us as researchers that it's not always about the next big idea, it's also about the precedents behind ideas and how they build over time. So they wrote a very important text that's called Information Visualization, using vision to think. And in that text, they defined data visualization as the use of computer science and computer-supported interactive visual representations of abstract data to amplify cognition. And this is a really classic example of when you connect the dots, how suddenly an image can appear from data, patterns appear from data that one would never imagine before. So data visualization draws upon, as I said, computer science, visual perception, and as you'll hear later, also the entire perceptual apparatus of the body, so audio, tactile, etc., graphic design and communication theory, to visually and interactively present data so it's explorable and discoverable. Thomas and Cook's article, Illuminating the Path, talks about visualization as inseparable from data analysis if effective uses of data will be achieved. And this is just an example of some of the work that we've done in our lab, where we're working with the City of Toronto. If you are from Toronto, you would know that there's a huge pressure on all of the community resources here. And we analyzed 5 years of their data, found a metaphor. This was led by Isabel Morellis and Patricio de Villa, two faculty here and a group of students. So found a metaphor, which were condos, to show the different activities at research community centers, and then looked at the distribution of those activities within Toronto in order to help parents make decisions about how they could find swimming, ballet, cooking classes, sports, etc. for their kids. And it was really interesting because one of the side products of this analysis was that everybody thought that families used recreation centers mostly for sports. And in fact, we found that the arts and culture use across Toronto is very high, and the demand is very high. So it was one of those examples where making data meaningful and being able to show it was very useful, both to the city and planning its resources, to families or individuals booking those resources, but also there were surprising revelations that came from actually representing and analyzing that data. So this is why representation is so important. And it really was Thomas and Cook who came up with the term visual analytics, and they were talking about the importance of really representation of data hand in hand with analytics, that in order to really synthesize data, we need to, and I quote, derive insight from massive dynamic ambiguous, and often conflicting data, to detect the unexpected and discover that unexpected in timely, defensible, and understandable assessments, as well as communicating that assessment effectively for action, end of quote. So really, it's important to kind of think about how data representation or visualization, here's just one of the little subsets of that image, is a very important tool right now as we're really moving into a time when the computational and algorithmic power of data mining and machine learning and deep learning and artificial intelligence we hear about a lot, but we really still need to be able to represent the discoveries that come from those technologies in order to bring the advantages from that data and this kind of algorithmic power back home to us, to humans. Because it is humans, really, who need to be able to gain the insights from the data and make better, more informed decisions from the data based on evidence. And again, data representation skills and tools have a very powerful role to play. So this is a very important representation, and you'll hear as I speak and maybe in some of the other lectures that issues of choices of color both are important in terms of cognitive capacity, but also very much because they represent, different things in different cultures. So as designers, we're always thinking about what is the meaning of a visualization, of a representation. And this is a wonderful visualization that shows how colors are meaningful in different ways within different kinds of cultures. So I want to talk a little bit about the time we're in too, because data visualization allows people, as I said, to make decisions, but also to reveal changes and trends more quickly. And you'll see that in our work with the Globe and Mail, to enable the discovery of the unexpected, and simple tools that are designed for interpretation and comprehension have the potential to provide access to machine-readable data sets. And very important here is the role of data analytics within community, in building community, in supporting better health outcomes, and more equal access to information in our daily lives. Big data and data analysis and representation is not just for corporate entities. It is so important in terms of democracy because it allows us to create an informed society, which is the baseline for democracy. And part of what we need to be able to do in terms of data analytics, this is a great tool that was designed by Francis Fiego and Martin Wattenberg, who are really incredible data representation artists and designers and analysts, and it was called Many Eyes. It was actually assumed by IBM, and it's an important system because it was one of the first really accessible environments where you could put your data sets there. You didn't need a lot of skill set to upload data. It would choose appropriate graphic representations for that data, and then it would output that data in ways where you could analyze it. And when it was designed by Vegas and Wattenberg, they actually thought that it would create its own environment in its own site. And what was very exciting was that all these community organizations, movements for democracy, housing, lobbyists, people trying to deal with issues of discrimination and democracy in the US and in Canada and other places in the world, land use, etc., actually use this tool. And for the first time, you had a large-scale adoption of really accessible data visualization being used for all kinds of questions and presentations in the world. So again, just to remind us of why these tools are so important, and I'm, of course, talking mostly today about visualization, but as you'll hear from Dr. Koppen, the representation of data is very important in other kinds of sensory ways. So it's really about the sensory apparatus and our ability to interpret this amazing amount of information around us. This is a system that our lab developed a few years ago, which was in collaboration with hospitals in Brazil, and it was a kind of early go at a technology that supported families, people with needs, that needed to be supported in long-term care and institutions, and the caregivers and the families and the individuals, in order to develop a kind of longitudinal analysis of their care and condition over time, and also to build a kind of support system around those individuals and families. And there's a lot of work in the healthcare space that does this. We were early in. And again, like that whole idea about using visualization in meaningful ways to be able to support more kind of democratic and integrated ways of caring in society is important. So just a few other examples of representations. Later on, Marcus is going to take you through the Visual Analytics Lab, and he's going to take you with some depth into the kind of work that we've done there. This is an example of some work we did for the Canada Council of the Arts, where they wanted to be much more transparent about the ways that they actually spend their money for their clients. And so we analyzed large amounts of their granting data, and we're able to show how that money is spent in regions, how it's spent on individuals versus organizational grants, and which disciplines, in fact, receive the larger amounts of money. So it was really an exercise using data visualization and transparency for a major funding institution in Canada. Okay. Some other examples of work, this is using CGI data and being able to model and represent the fetus to train nurses and doctors in interventions that they may need to make. And I know, again, Marcus is going to share some detail on this. This is a project with Newsworld, where we've been able to build a navigation system with their very, very large archive using natural language processing and a very visual representation of data where individuals can explore that archive. Another example, this is one of my favorite data visualization exercises ever. It's led by Lev Manovich. It's called On Broadway. These are, you can see what it is. It's like Twitter messages, Foursquare check-ins, Instagram, taxi pickups, drop-ups, and household income. And it's on Broadway. So it gives you this, that's a demographic analysis. That's actually an economic analysis of the status of people living on Broadway, the people who use that street in New York. It's the largest street, the longest street in New York, and you can see this kind of thickness kind of in the middle, where there's more wealth, more entertainment, more access to digital, and the far ends where there's more poverty and less access. Interestingly, that use of digital technologies is less present, and one of the wonderful things that Lev did with his team is he built this huge installation where you can see the data visualizations, which I showed you earlier, but also you can equally see the content, which is all kind of algorithmically placed together from the Instagram feeds, from the Twitter accounts, et cetera, from the photographs that have been uploaded, and it's a huge installation piece. And you have this experience of this street in New York in this completely different way. Some other work that OCAD University recently did called Expiry Date with Dennis Kavelman, one of the founders of BlackBerry, and he's built a data analytics system where you input your health data and your own demographic and genetic data, and it will predict when you're going to die. So yeah, there you go, and you can kind of figure out what you want to do with that. So yeah, so now I'm going to talk about my actual topic, which is, but I wanted to kind of set this up a little bit so that you would have a sense of what is data visualization, what are these people doing at this art and design school, and why are they interested in it? We've been working at OCAD University and York University. We've got a very long-standing collaborative research relationship with the Globe and Mail. We've been working with them in many ways over about 10 years now in terms of OCAD, and then York joined about 6 or 7 years ago. And we've been exploring different approaches to a data-driven news industry. And Dr. Anne is speaking tomorrow, and her research on machine learning complements the kind of analytics and visualization work that we've undertaken. So this is, I'm showing you some very early work where we were undertaking sentiment analytics of parts of the Globe and Mail and looking at ways that people could actually navigate through the Globe and Mail more based on the kind of feeling of articles and the content and the kind of feeling of different authors or editorial writers or news sections versus purely using content. So it's a pretty experimental way of thinking about navigation. We were looking at, what proportion of the article does each emotion constitute, and we were also looking at different visualization strategies from, circle graphs to pie charts to radial diagrams. And I'm just sort of taking you quickly through some of the work and then kind of looking at that and saying, well, what kinds of almost more experimental ways could we show relationships between parts of the Globe and Mail and the kind of feeling within it? And some of this work is, I think, some of the most beautiful work our lab has done, where we created these very kind of cellular, almost jellyfish-like representations of the globe based on the cycle of the week and its sections with different colors representing different affect. So why is the Globe interested in working with us? Well, because daily print newspaper circulation, paid and free, is in decline. And in 2016, there were about 5.2 million copies on an average publishing day, and then about 31.6 million over the course of a week. There's 84 paid dailies in Canada, which include like little regional papers, right? And 14 free dailies. So that created a weekly circulation of 31,550,000 per week. So when you take digital platforms into account, the Globe and Mail had a total readership of almost 8 million daily. And the challenge, of course, if you look back historically over what's happened with digitization, is that people paid for subscriptions, advertisers paid to be in that paper newspaper, and for the longest time, digital news was free. And it is free in lots of other platforms. So this is a huge challenge. And the Globe and Mail is competing for readers against companies that are trying to manage multiple outlets. Torstar, which is the Toronto Star, which is in perpetual financial crisis. Post Media, National Post, in perpetual financial crisis. Quebecor and the CBC. And Quebecor is less in crisis, but it's a very specific kind of market with a lot of market in France as well. And the CBC is subsidized. But also international media, The Guardian, New York Times, and the Washington Post, and Newsfeed. So if you're kind of a news junkie, but also my job requires me to consume a huge amount of news, I get up at 6 o'clock and I'm reading, frankly, the New York Times and the New Yorker and the Guardian and the Washington Post, and then I'm reading the Globe and Mail. I'm confessing this, I probably shouldn't be saying that. And Torstar and the Star, and sometimes the National Post, and then a whole lot of other RSS feeds that are coming from other places, right? Aggregators, et cetera. So it's very important for the Globe to, stay alive in this context. And a baseline for them is to keep their brand as a leading, reliable source of trusted news for Canadians, and then also to be able to reinvent traditional notions of content and delivery. So we talked about declining readership, and other papers like the New Yorker and the Washington Post. I'm just going to kind of take you through some of these interpretations of ways of moving through the Globe and Mail. This is something called cell chambers that we created. And the Guardian really have taken up this kind of digital transition to be effective just-in-time responses to their readers' interests. So the Globe and Mail has needed to test strategies and making use of subscription services. So they did create a paywall and anticipate and address user preferences from behind and outside that paywall. And that paywall is there in order to ensure that there's consistent subscription and that there's people who are using the Globe and there's a revenue stream, but they also have a huge number of customers that have chosen not to subscribe. So that means that they need to be able to, because research has shown that there's a 51% drop in site visits after you impose a paywall. So this was a study in 2013. Now it's become better because of the work the Globe and Mail has done in order to keep visitors subscribed and behind that paywall. But it also has meant that they can't rely on a paywall strategy as their 100% economic ballast. They need to, in fact, continue to attract and support advertising revenue, which has migrated from print media now to online and mobile. And so the print versions of newspapers 5 years ago had the majority of advertising spend in Canada. And by 2017, Canadian newspapers, that's the physical newspaper, were sitting at only 13% of spending, and digital was 42%. So lots of changes here. And again, just showing you, again, work we were doing with sentiment analytics. This is just showing attraction to different kinds of products across banks and using the metaphor of a tree, the money tree. So, you know, when customers are happy with a bank, the leaves are green and healthy. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the other kinds of work we've done for the Globe and Mail. So we did that work with sentiment analytics. It was more a kind of display relationship for them, being able to show things that you know, are interesting, that have content, exciting their reader base, more of almost a graphic design visualization exercise. In this particular project, which is topic analytics, we were actually building a system for their, not for their editors, but for their data analysts that would help them work with us to the next phase, which was a system for their editors. But this is experimenting with ways of showing topics that are trending and being able to understand how often that appears and provide a kind of graphic structure in order to be able to understand the ways that terms or ideas, in this instance in social media, within a specific time frame were showing up. Why are trends important? Trends are important because, as you know, the trusted just-in-time news provider, you want to be able to let your readers know when there's breaking news. And that's particularly important for business readers, which is a large part of the Globe and Mail's subscription base. And then finally, this was our final output, which the analysts were able to use. And you can see we're also pretty consistently presenting papers on this stuff as we go through. So in this particular project, what we were looking at is the ways that terms would appear, the frequency of those terms within a large database, which was the content you know, of the Globe and Mail, and the relationship between those various kinds of topics, which you can see as I talk about the next work we did, how this kind of in the background tool for the analysts helped us to then provide tools for editors that they've actually adopted, and most recently to provide a whole set of tools for their marketing team at the Globe and Mail. So it's important to say, and you'll hear this from Dr. Ann tomorrow, that the York team's also been working on what are called recommender engines. You'll hear a lot of detail about that. And those are tools that kind of parse through the data and then are able to say to you as a user, we've seen what you like to read. Here are some suggestions that are based on what you're interested in and your preferences. And by the way, here's some things that are kind of outside of your purview, but other people with your kinds of interests are interested in these things. So using a kind of recommender engine technology, one of the next projects we did was called Infinite Canvas. And with Infinite Canvas, this was a way of representing the content of articles to a reader organized by their preferences. So the kind of data analytics is running in the background, and they're providing you with things that you know you're interested in based on your preferences and your tastes. but not just what you say you want, but what you've actually shown you want by how you consume it. And then it's showing you a kind of timeline here of the kinds of things that you're reading, and you're able to go back to that and pull an article out of it at any point in time in order to understand, the thing you're reading now and its relationship to other stuff that you've read. So I'll just take you through some of these. And now we're going to talk about the Sophie heads-up display. So this is a really major project. It's a recommender engine for editors that we've helped the Globe and Mail to build. And a number of our team, Jessica Peter, Steve Zaghetti, Anna Joffrey, who is a postdoc. Steve is a postdoc in our lab. Gordon Adal, who is chief data scientist, one of the chief data scientists at the Globe and Mail, and myself worked on for quite a while. And it essentially outperforms commercial tools like Chartbeat. If you are interested in the kind of marketing world or advertising world, you know that there are some analytic tools for marketing folks to know, what is trending. So this is actually, if you take that work we did a couple of years ago that's saying, what are the trending topics? How do you represent them? This is about taking that data and providing it, to an editor to help them make editorial decisions. So we created, it's a way of helping editors to retain their readers by understanding which articles people are actually interested in, but also having a kind of longitudinal view of what news items and issues are coming up towards the paper and what are in different sections of the paper for people to be able to read. So it was designed for ease of use. For the editors and with various functions, for people with various functions at the Globe and Mail, those working really on the editorial front, less in the analytics. And it has been particularly important to homepage editors and section editors. I just want to say that this tool that we developed here at the university is 100% adopted by the Globe and Mail. So we're really proud of that. And they're taking this technology now, and they're in the midst of applying to the federal government to commercialize it, to be able to sell it to other newspapers and news media that need this kind of tool. So we did this work using essentially a kind of framework of how to work with user groups. And Lucy Sushman, who's a very important, cultural anthropologist, design anthropologist, she talks about how important it is to understand a work environment that you are designing for, to understand the cognitive processes when integrating or interacting with a system that's central to work. And so we embedded ourselves in the Globe and Mail. We carried out semi-structured interviews with 20 representatives of the editorial team. We conducted participant observations, so we watched what people worked, how they worked. We actually did a whole inventory of what tools they were using at the Globe and Mail that it in any way touched on data, touched on on the editors at that time without these tools, trying to understand what was trending. And from our work, there were 3 themes that came out, that systems needed to be extremely time sensitive to provide key metrics. Secondly, the ability to view historical data and live data. And then finally, mean to identify news stories of particular interest to readers. So we involved the staff members throughout the development process. We shared iterations of the work. So this is how we work with the Globe. It's probably important for us to say that, and you'll see that in the second project I'm going to share with you as well. So we work extremely closely with their teams. We are integrated with them. We share iterations of the work, low fidelity prototypes, interactive prototypes. We meet, we have charrettes. We involve staff members in addressing design challenges. And we elicit feedback frequently through unstructured and informal meetings. So out of that, in part, we came out with this idea of sort of fairly basic graphs and well-known principles of visual design. And some of the features of the Sophie heads-up display, without going through massive detail around it, are using indicators that look at the article's performance. So red, yellow, green, or gray to represent above average, average, and performance. And we were really careful to tone the colors to help people who have some components of color blindness to try and achieve something that every editor could use. We use 4 charts, a stacked area chart to show performance over time, a table that breaks down the number of users from different sources at any point in time, and a table of where the article has been promoted at the Globe and where the article has been promoted on social media with the number of likes or shares that it's received. So we're able to create something that's searchable, sortable, and can be filtered based on different metrics to help the user find the content that they're seeking. There's an Elsewhere button where a table opens that shows articles published in the last 24 hours and how those are trending. And performance indicators have tails attached to them that show you how the width of the article, how long it's been since the article was published. So we also have a way of showing a miniaturized version of the website so that the editor can always jump out of their graph and their graphic environment and see the entire space in which their articles are being shown. So this has been a very successful project. As I mentioned, we're moving into the next step, which are longitudinal visualizations, which allow editors to see responses to editorial strategies over time. We're also going to be able to compare, I'll go back, user responses with that of other editors, and we're going to be adding a much deeper social media analytics into it. And one of the things that's exciting for us right now is that we're actually going to be working with the Globe to take this tool, which is sort of focused on editors, and take it forward to work with the readers. So people will be able to have this visualization environment of content. So the last project is Taste Graphs. This is a project that is being led by our postdoc Ahmed Karwash and myself, with Anna Joffrey, Marcus Gordon, Jad Raba, Roxana Shepko, Gracie Mariano, Langsi Dong, Afruz Sanfi, who you'll hear from later on today, and Hugh Ritchie. So big team. And this system enables the Globe and Mail to better understand the psychographic profiles of their audiences, showing patterns regarding their audience's tastes in customized narrative visualizations. So this allows Globe and Mail marketing teams to gain holistic knowledge about their readership and to be able to see the impact of taste correlations and use these insights to inform advertising strategies. So what I'm showing here are just a whole series of visualization exercises that we've gone through for the last year and a half. We've been working on this project for about a year and a half, almost 2 years with the Globe, and what we were trying to do is look at ways of essentially relating. The core of this project is to use data analytics to say, okay, if I'm a constant tea drinker, and I'm looking at content about tea, what are the other things that I'm also really interested in? So it might be, in my instance, I'm obsessed with what's happening in the US and kids being separated from their families. So would you think about that? Necessarily tea drinker, follows American politics, not necessarily. So you'd be looking, what we're doing with this tool is we're looking at the different things that represent tastes, i.e. my priority interests, and we're finding ways of representing those against a general audience or other selected groups within the readership of the Globe and Mail. So as we know, the Globe produces a massive amount of data. What we're trying to do here again is to be able to understand behaviors and interests daily. And of course, that's a significant amount of knowledge, creating an interactive visualization tool. So this is, you're seeing again ways that we, in our original work, so this is work about a year ago that Anna Joffrey was leading, we're trying to show a hierarchy of hundreds of pages, using things like color saturation, positioning to show the relationships of tastes. And then what happened really was through and this is a circle packing diagram, so you'll see how this actually shows up in something we actually built, where you can kind of correlate a core taste and other tastes around it, and see the sort of prominence of those tastes. We used sunburst representations to be able to, which kind of goes back to our topic analytics, if you think back a number of projects ago, to try and show the big picture of what tastes were related to which other tastes. So again, the challenge is really to compare taste affinities between, it turned out what the globe needed was really between any two selected groups, and to show deeper insights about the affinities of any selected taste concerning other tastes. So as we met with the marketing folks and the design team at the Globe, it became more and more clear that they didn't need to show an extensive list of taste affinities, which you're seeing here, in relationship to their audiences, but rather to visually represent profiles and to evaluate and give an overview of taste performance measures for any group of readers. So to be far more selective in how we were able to show these tastes, which are just a kind of technical term for people's interests. So the other data set that the Globe had were not only this content of what people were interested in, and I'm just continuing to look through here, show you just different ways that we're looking at representing through dot matrices or circles, tastes and relationships at a glance. So these are all design experiments using bar charts, radar charts, network diagrams. You'll see it all play out in a moment. We really wanted to be able to cross-correlate tastes, and we were using work from Tufte, Holman, and Diakopoulos, who basically argue that you need to allow storytelling to extract enough detail from the data to be meaningful, and then from Goetz and Zhu, expressive insights being available to users through relatively simple analytics, but then being able to have more of an inference structure for the user for a kind of deeper level of analysis. We also knew that what the Globe needed was something that would be a collaborative tool. So this really is something, again, for their marketing folks to be able to take out to work with advertisers, potential advertisers, and say, look at these people are interested in these topics. This is how it potentially relates to your brand. Did you know that there are these correlations of interest? So Taste Graph, as it emerged, is really a storytelling tool, and it synthesizes data, as I said, collected about tastes, but it has another data set that we're working with, which are data collected from the performance of advertisements on the Globe and Mail website. So this is very important because it allows the user to filter through advertising data, isolate a group of site visitors, analyze the performance results of the selected group for tastes, and then using a kind of aggregated score. So I'm just going to get us to, there we go. So this is sort of, there you go. So this is the structure of the data. So this is what we're finally actually working with here, which is the universe, which is all of the tastes and their performance, and then the category or subcategory of a reader and the taste that they're interested in. And then you can see this other data set, which is essentially the advertising data. So this is what we developed as a way of really trying to understand the data structure itself to be able to then build visualization capacity. So, so we're looking at being able to tell stories, and the two pieces that we used essentially in this are a kind of visual strategy and then a kind of structural strategy so that the user can really understand what is the relationship, the backstory behind these tastes and the advertisement. So essentially, and this is a lot of the work that we were doing to kind of try and understand this. and then figure out, how do we, so you can see that we're sketching all the time. We're not always doing things on a computer. We're moving pieces around to try and capture and understand, how are the algorithms working to create that structure, and then how do we need to kind of think through, how to visually represent them. So here you go. So this is essentially, what we've created, which is kind of variation on a scatter plot, which shows a kind of general comparison between a selected group and then the universe, which is a term that identifies the overall audience of the globe and mail. And it lists tastes along the bottom, it provides a score, which is basically the amount of time users spend on a certain page and the general number of unique visitors to that page. And that's the X and Y axes, respectively. And then the second chart is a cluster graph. So I know I've sort of thrown a lot of images at you, but we really were experimenting with how to show these correlations between tastes in a way that's meaningful. So it's a cluster graph that's displayed when the user interacts with the initially displayed chart. When they click on a black or red bubble in the scatter plot, the tool shows a cluster chart, and it shows you other tastes that have the greatest affinity to the selected taste. This may be useful where there's a taste in the selected group that's performing particularly well. And then there's also a bar graph, which I'm not sure I have here, but it's a bar graph, which is a granular view of the comparison between the two different groups instead of bubbles. Yeah, so you can then click on two of those and it gives you a bar graph representation. So the kind of tactics we're using here are, group selection, taste filtering, the ability to search, navigating the group. And where we are right now with the process is that the Globe and Mail is extremely happy with this. They essentially feel that this is very close to being able to be tested by their user groups. So we're in the midst of getting ready for ethics review so we can do that. As I said, we've worked very, very closely with the Globe to create this. So both with their designers, their analysts, and their marketing team, which has been pretty exciting. And the background work there has been, we've created algorithms within the Apache Spark framework. So there's a whole engine that we created to do that kind of taste analytics. And we've also worked with the Globe and Mail analytics group to integrate their analytics strategies, and obviously a lot of work on design. And then this is no longer a low fidelity prototype. It's actually pushing the large data sets through this system to be able to, in real time, visualize what the tastes are and how they're correlated. So we're really excited about this. We're going to continue to work with multiple visualization types and also to really test it with large quantities of data to make sure that it's able to perform. It's not real time in the way that Sophie is. Like Sophie is a real time tool. With this, we're able to look at retroactive performance. So that's really important if you're a marketer and you want to know what's the history, which is some of the other visualization work we need to do. What's the history over time? So there's actually the ability on the sidebar, which I didn't talk about, to choose the time frame you want to look at. You can actually combine different time frames. You can see there. So you can see how user groups maybe have changed their correlations over time, and you can also see how particular advertising campaigns from an advertiser would correlate at a particular point in time with the analysis of taste. So this is working with marketing and advertising. One can take this kind of system and you can use it for all kinds of other analytic works. It is ambiguous. It's kind of neutral in how it's applied. We're using Globe and Mail colors and aesthetics here, but you could do something very similar with different kinds of taste analysis. So I know this is sort of in the space of Cambridge Analytics, which is not a nice world. One could use this kind of tool and use it for all kinds of social good in terms of looking at, the interests and tastes of people, for example, in relationship to social justice. And I just wanted to say that OCAD has a wonderful exhibition that's opening on July 11th. I'm sorry it's not open yet. And it's in our gallery, which is at 199 Richmond Street West in on-site. And it's called Diagrams of Power. And it's the entire show is about visualizations in different ways that look at issues of social justice and change, Indigenous rights and campaigns and issues. And it's both using more traditional mapping technologies or ways of representing and also big data visualization. So if you are in the GTA, I encourage you to check that out. And I'm done. That's it. We've been mostly using D3, right, Marcus, for a lot of this? Yeah. So we're building in D3, but we do everything. So we work with Python. We work with basically any kind of visualization tool that we can get our hands on. Yeah, we've been doing some, like the piece that was about the city was actually, which, is amazing. Tableau is actually a very flexible tool, and that was built in Tableau, because you can actually introduce metaphor. It's a pretty design-friendly software environment. Did you have another question? Good.
I was just curious to know if one of your indicators was comments people left, or...
That is such a great question. So, in the beginning, when we did the sentiment analytics work with the Globe, the original idea was that we were going to actually try and provide them with tools to manage their commentary. My PhD was based on very early social media affect management tool to try and change the kind of caliber of negative discourse in social media. So they were really interested in those kinds of management tools, and it turned out that we couldn't get the rights to actually, they couldn't really get the rights to work with their social media content for lots of reasons, including privacy. But what's happened is that a lot of where that commentary has moved is into social, like into more, like big socials, so Twitter, et cetera, that you can follow and that you can analyze. So that's why our second stage of a lot of work with both Sophie and taste graphs potentially would be to look at, analyzing group commentary and connecting it back into both of those technologies. Yep.
Hi, so I'm curious, being like Art and Design Institute, I know that there's a lot of sort of thought in the analytics community that you should have really low sort of ink to data ratio, and simple is good, but I mean obviously a lot of the stuff you're doing looks really stunning, and I'm just wondering how you balance sort of the visual creative side and sort of trying to communicate really directly and simply to your viewers.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think visualization strategy or representation strategy, because we've actually done some work in our lab with physical tactile interfaces. I think you need to understand the audience, like your user group, and be able to design for their needs and also for the context. So there's I could give a whole lecture on data sculpture and the kind of work we were doing earlier that I showed in the beginning with the Globe that's, less explicit, but more gives you a kind of aha experience, from the data. There's a whole movement of data sculpture right now, artists working with data in amazingly interesting ways. Which does give you an understanding of it, but it's not an analytic tool to make decisions, right? So it's very much about understanding the context of use. But one of the things that we found in our lab, and maybe it's something Ajaz and Marcus will talk about later in the afternoon, is that You know, we've had companies come to us, like we work with a company called Enlogic, and they came to us because they just felt that a lot of the traditional visualization tools were really banal, and they were numbing their analysts because they were so simple and so uninteresting, and so they so failed to personalize to the user that the analysts didn't see anymore or didn't perceive anymore, you know, what the outcomes were. So, you know, part of it is, and Peter will, I know, will talk about, but you know, multisensory explorations of data. And Marcus, are you going to show the table talk? Yeah. So you're going to see in our lab something that we've done, which really includes like physical interaction, collaboration, and visualization in a way that helps to keep people active and engaged. But I think a lot of it is understanding the context. And in the visualization community, there's now there used to be a separation of sort of, you know, information representation and navigation and analysis, and now everybody's trying to bring that together to make more meaningful visualizations. So beauty doesn't necessarily negate meaningfulness. So thank you.